Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent weekends at the mall or watching movies, she was at the local community center teaching self-defense classes to women who couldn't afford gym memberships. Her friends often joked that she was born with a superhero complex. But Sarah simply called it doing what was right. Growing up in a military family, Sarah learned early that service meant sacrifice. Her father, Sergeant Miguel Martinez, had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before retiring due to an injury that left him walking with a slight limp. Every evening at dinner, he would share stories not of combat, but of the soldiers who looked out for each other, the medics who ran toward danger, and the quiet heroes who never made headlines but saved lives every day. Sarah's mother, Elena, worked double shifts as a nurse at the county hospital. She would come home exhausted but always found time to help Sarah with homework or listen to her dreams of joining the military. Elena had mixed feelings about her daughter's military aspirations, but she recognized the same determination in Sarah's eyes that had drawn her to Miguel years ago. At 18, Sarah shocked everyone by choosing the Marines over college scholarships. Her high school counselor tried to convince her to reconsider, pointing out her excellent grades and multiple scholarship offers, but Sarah had made up her mind. She wanted to serve her country, and she wanted to do it with the best. Boot camp at Paris Island was everything Sarah expected and more. The drill instructors pushed her beyond limits she didn't know she had. She learned to march for hours in the blazing South Carolina heat, to clean her rifle until it gleamed, and to work as part of a unit where individual success meant nothing if the team failed. During her final weeks of training, Sarah met Rebecca Chen, a quiet but determined recruit from California. Rebecca was struggling with the physical demands of training, particularly the obstacle courses. While other recruits focused on their own performance, Sarah stayed behind every evening to help Rebecca practice. She showed her how to grip the rope properly during climbs and shared techniques for conserving energy during long runs. Their drill instructor, Staff Sergeant Williams, noticed Sarah's natural leadership abilities. She didn't just excel at her own tasks, she lifted up everyone around her. When one recruit was caught stealing food from the mess hall because he was too proud to admit he wasn't getting enough to eat, Sarah quietly shared her own rations and helped him talk to the nutritionist about increasing his meal portions. After graduation, Sarah chose military police as her specialty. She wanted to protect and serve, but she also wanted to make a difference in people's lives beyond combat situations. Her training at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri taught her investigation techniques, crowd control, and most importantly, how to de-escalate tense situations without violence. Sarah's first assignment took her to Camp Pendleton in California, where she quickly earned respect among her fellow Marines. She had a unique ability to connect with people, whether she was mediating disputes between Marines or helping local civilians who came to the base for assistance. Her commanding officer, Captain Rodriguez, noted in her first performance review that Sarah had the rare combination of tactical skills and emotional intelligence that made exceptional leaders. One incident early in her career would define how others saw Sarah Martinez. A domestic violence call came in from base housing late one night. A Marine's wife had called security, saying her husband was drinking heavily and threatening her. When Sarah and her partner arrived, they found a 6-foot-tall Marine in an alcohol-fueled rage, throwing furniture and screaming at his terrified wife and 2 young children. Sarah's partner wanted to call for backup immediately, but Sarah asked him to wait. She approached the situation calmly, speaking to the Marine in a steady, respectful voice. She didn't try to physically restrain him or shout commands. Instead, she talked to him about his service, his children, and his pain. It took nearly an hour. But eventually, the Marine broke down crying and allowed himself to be taken for help. His wife later wrote a letter to Sarah's commanding officer, saying that Sarah had saved her family. Word of Sarah's compassion and effectiveness spread throughout the base. Marines began seeking her out for advice, and civilian contractors often requested her specifically when dealing with security issues. She had a reputation for finding solutions that didn't involve arrests or confrontations. When Sarah learned about an upcoming deployment to Afghanistan, she volunteered immediately. Many of her fellow Marines were surprised. She had a comfortable position at Pendleton and was being considered for promotion. Why would she want to leave for a dangerous combat zone? Sarah's answer was simple. Her fellow Marines were going, and she wanted to watch their backs. She had spent 2 years building relationships and trust at Pendleton, but she knew the real test of her abilities would come in a place where every decision could mean life or death. The months leading up to deployment were intense. Sarah trained constantly, learning about Afghan culture, studying maps of their assigned region, and preparing for the unique challenges of military police work in a combat zone. She would be responsible for training Afghan police officers, investigating incidents involving both military personnel and civilians, and providing security for convoys traveling through hostile territory. 3 weeks before deployment, Sarah's father pulled her aside during a family barbecue. Miguel had been watching his daughter prepare for war, and he was both proud and terrified. He told her about the responsibility she would carry, not just for her own safety, but for the Marines who would depend on her judgment and skills. Sarah listened quietly as her father shared advice he had learned in his own combat tours. He taught her about the importance of trusting her instincts, staying connected to her team, and never forgetting that every person she encountered, whether friend or enemy, was someone's child, parent, or sibling. As Sarah's deployment date approached, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that she had never experienced before. She was confident in her training and abilities, but she also understood that Afghanistan would test everything she had learned about leadership, courage, and sacrifice. Her last night in the United States, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat on her apartment balcony, looking at the stars and thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a teenager teaching self-defense in a community center to a Marine preparing for combat, every experience had prepared her for what lay ahead. Sarah had no way of knowing that her deployment would become a story of heroism that would inspire thousands of people and bring 500 Marines to their feet in tribute. She only knew that she was ready to serve her country and protect her fellow Marines, whatever the cost. Afghanistan hit Sarah Martinez like a physical force the moment she stepped off the transport plane. The heat was oppressive, the dust seemed to coat everything instantly, and the constant awareness of danger created a tension she had never experienced before. But within days, Sarah found her rhythm in this harsh environment. Forward Operating Base Warrior was home to nearly 800 Marines, soldiers, and support personnel. Located in Helmand Province, the base served as a hub for operations throughout the region. Sarah's unit, the 3rd Military Police Company, was responsible for security operations both on base and during missions into nearby villages and cities. Sarah quickly distinguished herself among the unit. While other Marines struggled with the cultural differences and language barriers, Sarah threw herself into learning basic Pashto and understanding local customs. She spent her off-duty time talking with Afghan interpreters, asking questions about their families, their hopes for their country, and their perspectives on the American presence. Her commanding officer, Major Thompson, assigned Sarah to train a group of Afghan National Police officers who would eventually take over security responsibilities in the region. These men and women were risking their lives daily by working with American forces, knowing that insurgents had marked them as traitors. Sarah's job was to teach them investigation techniques, proper arrest procedures, and how to build trust within their communities. The training sessions were challenging in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated. Many of the Afghan officers had little formal education, and some couldn't read or write. Others had deep suspicions about American motives and questioned whether the techniques Sarah taught would work in their culture. But Sarah approached each session with patience and respect, adapting her teaching methods to meet each officer where they were. One of her students, Officer Ahmad Wali, became particularly important to Sarah's work. Wali was a 5-year-old father of 4 who had been a police officer before the Taliban took control of his district years earlier. He had been forced to flee with his family, living in refugee camps until American forces helped establish new police units. Wali spoke excellent English and served as an unofficial bridge between Sarah and the other Afghan officers. Through Wali, Sarah learned about the complex challenges facing Afghan police. They were caught between insurgents who threatened their families and American forces who sometimes didn't understand local politics and relationships. Many officers were working without proper equipment, regular pay, or adequate support from their own government. Sarah began advocating for her Afghan partners with American commanders. She requested better equipment, helped establish regular payment schedules, and created programs that allowed Afghan officers to bring their families onto the secure base during times of heightened threats. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Within 3 months of her arrival, recruitment for the local police force had increased significantly. The breakthrough moment in Sarah's deployment came during her 4th month in country. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target, a Taliban commander responsible for multiple roadside bomb attacks, was hiding in a compound about 20 miles from the base. The mission would require a joint operation between American Marines and Afghan police officers. Most American commanders preferred to conduct such operations without Afghan involvement, citing security concerns and coordination difficulties. But Sarah convinced Major Thompson to include Wally and 3 other Afghan officers she had trained. She argued that local knowledge and community relationships would be crucial to the mission's success. The operation was scheduled for dawn on a Tuesday morning. Sarah spent the previous evening going over maps and procedures with both the Marine assault team and the Afghan officers. She emphasized the importance of treating civilians with respect and following proper arrest procedures, even in a combat situation. As the convoy moved through the pre-dawn darkness toward the target compound, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of adrenaline and focused calm that came before dangerous operations. She was riding in the lead vehicle with Wally and 2 other Afghan officers, serving as the primary liaison between American and Afghan forces. The compound was located in a small village surrounded by agricultural fields. Intelligence suggested the Taliban commander was hiding in a house owned by his cousin, but the exact location within the compound was unknown. As the convoy approached, Sarah could see lights beginning to appear in some houses as the village began waking up for the day. The assault team moved into position around the compound, while Sarah and the Afghan officers approached the main gate. The plan was for Wally to announce their presence in Pashto, explaining that they were there to arrest a suspected insurgent and asking for cooperation from the residents. What happened next would haunt Sarah for the rest of her life, though it would last only minutes. As Wally began speaking through a megaphone, the compound erupted in gunfire. The Taliban commander had been expecting them, and the building was heavily fortified with multiple fighting positions. Sarah immediately took cover behind a stone wall and began coordinating between the American and Afghan forces. Radio communications were chaotic, with multiple units trying to report positions and request support simultaneously. Through the noise and confusion, Sarah maintained her focus on the primary objective, neutralizing the threat while minimizing civilian casualties. The firefight lasted nearly 30 minutes. Sarah moved between positions, helping to coordinate flanking maneuvers and ensuring that Afghan and American forces weren't accidentally firing on each other. Her training and natural leadership abilities shone through the chaos as she helped organize what could have been a disastrous situation. During a brief lull in the fighting, Wally pointed out movement in a nearby building where several families lived. Children and elderly civilians were trapped inside, unable to flee because of the crossfire. The Taliban fighters were using the civilian presence as protection, knowing that American forces would be reluctant to use heavy weapons near innocent people. Sarah made a decision that defined her character and ultimately led to the events that would make her a hero. Against direct orders to wait for backup, she volunteered to lead a small team to evacuate the civilians. The mission would require crossing 50 yards of open ground under potential sniper fire, entering an unsecured building, and guiding terrified families to safety. Major Thompson initially refused to authorize the mission, arguing that it was too dangerous and not essential to the primary objective. But Sarah pressed her case, pointing out that protecting innocent lives was exactly the reason they were in Afghanistan. She also noted that successfully evacuating the civilians would allow American forces to use more aggressive tactics against the remaining insurgents. With reluctant approval from her commanding officer, Sarah began preparing for what everyone knew was an extremely dangerous mission. She would lead a team consisting of herself, Wali, one other Afghan officer named Kareem, and Marine Corporal James Mitchell, a medic who volunteered to provide medical support for any injured civilians. As Sarah prepared her equipment and went over the plan with her team, she thought briefly about her parents back in Texas. She wondered what they would think about the risk she was about to take. But she pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the mission ahead. The civilian evacuation would prove to be Sarah Martinez's final act of service, but it would also become the defining moment that showed the world what true heroism looked like. In a few minutes, this young Marine from Texas would demonstrate the values and courage that had driven her to serve her country and protect others throughout her life. The sprint across open ground felt like it lasted forever, though it took less than 30 seconds. Sarah Martinez led her small team in a zigzag pattern toward the building where civilians were trapped, her heart pounding as bullets whistled overhead. Behind her, Wally, Kareem, and Corporal Mitchell followed her exact path, trusting her judgment completely. They reached the building's entrance without casualties, pressing against the wall as Sarah called out in Pashto that they were there to help. The response from inside was immediate. Crying children, frightened voices, and the sound of people moving away from windows. Sarah could hear at least 3 families inside, including what sounded like very young children. Wally took the lead in communicating with the civilians, explaining who they were and what they needed to do. The families were terrified, caught between the Americans outside and the knowledge that Taliban fighters might be watching their every move. Working with children in crisis situations required a delicate touch that Sarah had learned during her community center days back in Texas. The evacuation plan was simple but dangerous. Sarah's team would escort the families in small groups across the open ground to a secure area behind American lines. Each trip would take about 2 minutes, but would expose both the rescuers and the civilians to sniper fire and potential rocket attacks. The first group consisted of 2 elderly women and 3 small children. Sarah went first, carrying a toddler who couldn't walk fast enough on her own. The little girl was crying softly, and Sarah spoke to her in gentle tones, mixing English and the few Pashto words she knew. Behind her, Wally and Kareem helped the elderly women, while Mitchell provided rear security. They made it safely to the American position, where other Marines took charge of the civilians. Without hesitation, Sarah's team immediately headed back for the second group. The Taliban fighters had apparently realized what was happening, because the gunfire intensified as they made their second crossing. The building now held 1 extended family: parents, grandparents, and 4 children, ranging in age from infant to teenager. This group would be more challenging to move because one of the children had been injured by flying debris and was having difficulty walking. Mitchell quickly examined the boy's leg and determined that he could move with assistance. As they prepared for the second evacuation, an unexpected development changed everything. Through the radio, Sarah heard that Taliban reinforcements were approaching the village from 2 directions. If her team didn't move quickly, they could be cut off from American lines entirely. The smart tactical decision would have been to abandon the remaining civilians and return to safety immediately. Sarah made a different choice. She informed Major Thompson that her team was committed to evacuating all the civilians before withdrawing. The Major's response was sharp and direct. Get back to American lines immediately. But Sarah's radio seemed to have developed technical problems at exactly that moment, and she was unable to hear any further orders clearly. The second evacuation began with Sarah carrying the injured boy, while his teenage brother stayed close beside her. The family moved as quickly as they could, but progress was slow due to the injured child and the elderly grandparents who had difficulty moving quickly. Halfway across the open ground, Sarah realized they were not going to make it before Taliban reinforcements arrived. Making a split-second decision that would define her legacy, Sarah handed the injured boy to Corporal Mitchell and told him to get the family to safety. She would stay behind to provide covering fire and slow down the approaching enemy forces. Wally immediately protested, saying he would stay with her, but Sarah ordered him to help Mitchell with the civilians. The argument lasted only seconds because they could hear vehicles approaching. Mitchell grabbed the injured boy and began moving toward American lines with the family. Wally and Kareem reluctantly followed, knowing that Sarah was right about the tactical situation, but hating to leave her behind. Sarah found a defensive position behind a low stone wall that gave her a clear view of the routes the Taliban reinforcements would use to enter the village. She had approximately 200 rounds of ammunition and several grenades. Her job was simple: delay the enemy long enough for the civilians and her team to reach safety, then find a way to withdraw herself. The Taliban vehicles appeared within minutes. Sarah could see at least 12 fighters in 3 pickup trucks, all armed with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades. They were moving fast, trying to reach the main firefight before American forces could complete their mission and withdraw. Sarah opened fire when the lead vehicle was about 150 yards away. Her first shots were carefully aimed at the vehicle's engine block, and she was rewarded by seeing steam and smoke begin pouring from under the hood. The vehicle coasted to a stop, and its occupants scrambled for cover behind nearby buildings. The second and third vehicles immediately changed course, spreading out to make themselves more difficult targets. Sarah shifted her fire between them, forcing both to take cover and disrupting their advance. She was buying precious time, but she knew her position would soon be overrun. Through her radio, Sarah could hear the primary assault team completing their mission. The Taliban commander had been killed, and American forces were preparing to withdraw from the village. Major Thompson's voice came through clearly, ordering all units to fall back to the extraction point immediately. Sarah acknowledged the order and began planning her own withdrawal. But as she moved from her position, she realized that the Taliban fighters had used her distraction to surround her location. She was trapped, with enemy forces between her and the American lines. The firefight that followed lasted 7 minutes. Sarah moved between 3 different positions, using her knowledge of urban combat techniques to stay ahead of the Taliban fighters who were trying to capture or kill her. She was outnumbered 12-1, but her superior training and equipment gave her significant advantages. During those final minutes, Sarah thought about many things. She thought about her parents, who had raised her to understand that service sometimes required sacrifice. She thought about the Afghan families she had just helped save, and about Wally and the other officers she had trained who would continue working to build a better future for their country. Most importantly, she thought about the Marines who depended on her leadership and example. Even in this desperate situation, Sarah was setting an example of courage and selflessness that would inspire others long after she was gone. The end came suddenly. Sarah was moving between positions when a rocket-propelled grenade exploded near her location. She was critically injured but managed to continue fighting for several more minutes before her ammunition ran out. When American reinforcements finally reached her position 20 minutes later, they found evidence of Sarah's final heroic stand. The news of Sarah Martinez's sacrifice spread quickly through military channels. Within hours, Marines throughout Afghanistan knew the story of the young military police officer who had given her life to save Afghan civilians. Within days, the story had reached Marine bases around the world. But it was what happened 3 weeks later that would demonstrate the true impact of Sarah's heroism. When her body was returned to the United States for burial, something unprecedented occurred at the memorial service held at Camp Pendleton. Major Thompson had planned a standard military memorial, expecting attendance from Sarah's unit and a few other personnel who had known her personally. Instead, Marines began arriving from bases across the country. They came from Paris Island, where Sarah had graduated from boot camp. They came from Fort Leonard Wood, where she had learned her military police skills. They came from every Marine base on the West Coast. When the memorial service began, 500 Marines were standing at attention in perfect formation. They had not been ordered to attend. They had not been asked to come. They came because the story of Sarah Martinez had touched something fundamental in their understanding of what it meant to be a Marine. The service itself was simple. Major Thompson spoke about Sarah's courage and leadership. Wally, who had been granted special permission to travel to the United States, spoke about her dedication to training Afghan police officers and her respect for Afghan culture. Sarah's parents shared memories of their daughter's determination to serve others from an early age. But the moment that defined the entire service came when it was time for the final tribute. One Marine, a young Lance Corporal who had never met Sarah personally, stood up and began to salute. Within seconds, all 500 Marines rose to their feet in unison, holding their salutes in perfect silence. They held that salute for 2 full minutes, honoring a fellow Marine who had embodied the Corps' values of honor, courage, and commitment. In that moment, Sarah Martinez became more than an individual hero. She became a symbol of everything the Marines aspired to represent. After the service, many of the attending Marines sought out Sarah's parents. They shared stories of how Sarah's example had inspired them to volunteer for difficult assignments, to treat civilians with greater respect, and to look out for their fellow Marines. Her legacy was already spreading throughout the Corps. Officer Ahmad Wali returned to Afghanistan, carrying letters from Sarah's parents to the other Afghan police officers she had trained. These men and women continued their dangerous work, motivated in part by the memory of the American Marine, who had believed in them and sacrificed her life protecting Afghan families. Today, A training facility at Camp Pendleton bears Sarah Martinez's name. Every military police officer who graduates from the school learns about her story and the example she set. Her photograph hangs in the entrance hall, showing a young woman in dress blues with a slight smile that somehow conveys both determination and compassion. The lesson of Sarah Martinez extends far beyond military service. Her life demonstrated that true heroism isn't about seeking glory or recognition. It's about making the choice to help others, even when that choice involves personal risk. It's about treating all people with dignity and respect, regardless of their background or circumstances. The 500 Marines who stood to honor Sarah Martinez understood something profound about sacrifice and service. They recognized that in giving her life to save others, Sarah had shown them what it really meant to live up to their oath to protect and defend. Her heroism inspired them to be better Marines and better people. Sarah Martinez never got to see the impact of her sacrifice, but her legacy continues to inspire new generations of Marines and civilians alike. Her story reminds us that real heroes are often ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things when circumstances demand courage and selflessness. In the end, that's perhaps the most important lesson of all. Heroism isn't something you're born with. It's something you choose, moment by moment, when faced with the opportunity to serve something greater than yourself.